Hello everyone. Among the financial statement analysis tools, financial ratios is the most reliable and useful tool in measuring and analyzing the health of a business. So let us know what are these financial ratios and what are these ratios telling us about a certain company. So a financial statement ratio is a relationship that indicates something about a company's activities, such as the ratio between the company's current assets and current liabilities, or between its accounts receivable and its annual sales. So basically, a financial statement ratio tells us the relationship of accounts in the financial statements. So it will tell us the company's activities through the accounts found inside the financial statements. So these ratios can help an individual understand a company's performance relative to that of its competitors to trace performance over time. So when we compute the financial ratios, we can compare these computed ratios to our competitors or to that of its competitors. So for effective assessment of the health of a business, kailangan ikino-compare natin siya sa iba. Okay? So, yung mako-compute nating ratio later on, assuming that we have our own business, we need to compare those computed ratios to competitors or to our competition. Okay? So, in order for us to see if the company is improving or not, or is getting ahead of the competition, we need to trace the performance of our business in relation to our competitors. So, we need to compare. It also provides a broader basis for comparison than raw numbers do. So, hindi lang tayo basta magko-compute dito ng ratio na 1:1, 2:1, 3:1, etc. So, we need to analyze what these raw numbers tells us. Okay? So, we need to compare this to our previous performance. We need to compare this to our competition or to our competitors. And most importantly, we need to compare our performance not only with the competition but with other industry or with other competition within an industry. So, ratios on their own without year-to-year or other industry firm comparative ratios, it will be of little use in judging the health or future of the industry or the firm being analyzed. So, hindi magiging effective yung ating magiging assessment if we are not going to compare this to competition and to the industry as well. So, ratio analysis can reveal much about a company and its operations. First, it can indicate areas of strength or weakness. It can tell much about a corporation. So through the use of financial ratios, we can see later what are the strengths and weaknesses of a certain company. Mapipinpoint natin or makikita natin through the numbers or through figures or through dun sa mako-compute nating ratios kung saan mahina or saan merong strength si business. There is no single correct value for a ratio. The observation that the value of a particular ratio is too high, too low, or just right depends on the perspective of the analyst and on the company's competitive strategy. Another thing, aside from we are going to compare our computed ratios to our previous performance, to competition, and to other industry, yung pag-analyze natin is nakadepende, no, dun sa mag-a-analyze. Okay, so let's say for example, what we can compute out of these financial ratios can vary, no? Yung interpretation or the assessment can vary based on the perspective nung mag-a-analyze. Okay? So, nakadepende sa kanya kung paano niya titingnan, kung para ba sa kanya ay okay na ba yung ganitong ratio? Is it enough or is it too high or is it too low? So, it depends on the perspective of the analyst. Okay? And also, on the company's goals, on the company's competitive strategy. So there is no single correct value for a ratio. So hindi natin pwedeng sabihin na kapag ka nag 5 is to 1 or nag 2 is to 3 or nag 3 is to 3, nagtabla yung ratio, eh maganda na siya sa kahit anong type ng business. So depende yon sa nature or type ng business, depende dun sa goals and sa strategies din ng organization. So there is no perfect or there is no single correct value for a ratio. Then a financial ratio is meaningful only when it is compared with some standard, such as an industry trend, a ratio trend for the specific company being analyzed, or a stated management objective. So assessing it alone with a raw figure or raw numbers is not useful. So it needs to be compared with some standard, no? So in order for us to say na merong growth or nag-grow nga si business or nag-i-improve si business, kailangan meron tayong pamamarisan, meron tayong magiging benchmark, meron tayong ipagko-compare, no? So in order for the financial ratios to be useful. So financial ratios provide two types of comparisons. First, industry comparisons. So just like what I have said earlier, financial ratios are computed and compared with the industry average. So we need to compare to the industry. So through industry comparison, the company may be able to compare their performance against their competitors and how they fare with them. And also, trend analysis. The firm's financial ratios are computed and compared with their past performance. So, yung sinabi ko rin kanina, yung performance na na-compute natin for this year, we need to compare that on the previous years in order for us to see if there is an improvement or if there is growth on our strategy, on our utilization of budget or utilization of resources. So by the trends, the company will know if their financial performance is improving or not over the years. So it is a very powerful tool in deciding the actions that the company should take in the future. So again, it is one of the most reliable tool in financial statement analysis. So first classification of financial ratios is the liquidity ratios. So we have here the working capital ratio, current ratio, quick ratio, and cash position ratio. So para saan ba ang liquidity ratios? And ano ang sinasabi ng liquidity ratios to us in order to effectively assess one's performance? So liquidity ratios are the prime concern of short-term creditors because this provide insight of the firm's capability to pay its current obligations. So our creditors, as part of our stakeholders, specifically short-term creditors, are up to the performance or the liquidity of the business because they are concerned if mababayaran ba sila ni business or ni firm in due time. Okay? So, importante sa kanila na makita na liquid si business because they will depend on the capability of the firm to pay its current obligations. So basically, liquidity ratios measure the capability of the firm or the business to pay its current obligations. Firms with good liquidity were able to cushion possible financial contingencies that might arise in case of labor strikes, steep price increase of raw materials, or other possible events resulting in the temporary stoppage of operations. So it is good na ang isang business or isang firm ay merong high liquidity or with good liquidity. Ibig sabihin, meron silang capability to still pay their obligations or they have emergency funds in case there are emergencies or contingencies. They have enough funds or they have enough cash to spend. In a profitable situation, liquidity reflects the capacity of the firm to generate cash inflow to offset cash outflow. The firm's liquidity also affects its capacity to borrow. A low liquidity position of a firm will make loan applications difficult due to poor credit risk. So, maganda na merong high liquidity or maganda ang standing ni firm in terms of liquidity because it can affect its capacity to borrow. No, mas madali kasing i-grant yung borrow o yung pag-borrow sa isang bangko typically no, kapag ka maganda ang liquidity standing ng isang business. So kapag ka mababa ang liquidity position ng isang firm, it will make them difficult no, para makapagpa-approve ng loan applications. So first ratio under liquidity ratio is the working capital. So when you say working capital, this is the difference between the current assets and current liabilities. So in Tagalog, ito yung pampaikot, no? So the working capital. So a positive working capital means the firm is able to meet its current maturing obligation with a safety cushion to meet other unexpected or unrecorded current liabilities. So, kapag ang isang business ay may positive working capital, ibig sabihin, kaya niya na emit no, or kaya niyang bayaran yung kanyang maturing obligations within a period of time. So, typically, sa loob ng isang taon, no, once na capable ng isang business to pay or to settle their obligations within a year. Okay? So, we can say that they are liquid. So, the formula for working capital is current assets less current liabilities. So, makikita lang natin dito yung difference ng current assets and current liabilities. Yung sosobra, no, ibig sabihin, meron pang pampaikot si business, no, or working capital. So, yung figures na gagamitin natin for this ay manggagaling doon sa ibibigay kong material. No? Yung financial statement na gagamitin natin for these computations ay ibibigay ko po sa inyo. So let's say for example, for the year 2012, we have the current assets of 205,000 and then we have 104,000 na current liabilities. So using the formula, you just simply subtract the current liabilities from the current assets and then ang may yield natin is 101,000. So that means meron pang 101,000 na working capital si business for the year 2012. Then for the year 2013, meron naman siyang current assets na 220,000 and then ang current liabilities is 105,000. So we yield 115,000 as our working capital. Then for 2014, 245,000 na CA less 110,800 na current liabilities, meron tayong 134,200. So, with the figures na naka-red, yung nakuha nating sagot, we can see na nag-i-improve yung working capital. So, why do we say that? Because nag-i-increase yung amount ng kanyang working capital. So, that means lumalaki yung kanyang pampaikot or yung kanyang working capital. Or, meron tayong positive working capital. So, that means the more na mas mataas siya, the more na mas meron siyang capability to settle or to meet its maturing obligations. Okay? So, yun yung ibig sabihin. So, hindi po sapat na na-compute lang natin, we need to analyze also. Next ratio under liquidity ratio is the current ratio. So, it assesses the ability of the firm to meet its current liabilities as paid by its current assets. So, almost similar din siya kay working capital, no? Pero pagdating sa formula, okay, so we are going to divide current assets to current liabilities to yield the current ratio. So, a current ratio of more than 1 is an indication that the firm is liquid and in a good position to meet its currently maturing obligations. So, kapag ka ang nakuha nating ratio sa ating computation later ay more than 1, that means mas liquid daw si firm. Okay? So, let's compute. For 2012, 205,000 divided by 104,000, nakuha natin is 1.97. So, pwede natin siyang dagdagan para maging ratio siya. 1.97 is to 1. Okay? For 2013, 220,000 divided by 105,000, we yield 2.10. Then for 2014, 245,000 divided by 110,800, we have 2.21. So let's assess again. So as you can see here, we have increasing ratio. So again, ang sabi natin, a current ratio of more than 1 is an indication that the firm is liquid and in a good position to meet its currently maturing obligations. So the more na mas mataas siya, mas maganda raw. Because it means the company or the firm is liquid and in a good position to meet its maturing obligation. Okay? But then again, sabi ko nga before, a high ratio always doesn't mean that it is good. So, depende pa rin po yan sa nag-a-analyze. Depende rin sa nature or type ng business. Pwede rin kasi na kaya mataas ang ratio is that hindi na i-utilize ni firm yung kanyang cash in other investments. Nagiging idle yung cash, kaya mataas yung ating nako-compute na ratio. No? So, titingnan din natin, sa pag-analyze, titingnan din natin, bakit ba tumaas yung ating ratio na na-compute? Alin sa part ng ating current assets or ng ating current liabilities ang nag-increase or nag-decrease? Pwede kasing may significant na ibig sabihin yung bawat account, no, doon sa loob ng current assets and current liabilities. So, gaya nga ng sabi ko, kung mataas ang mako-compute nating ratio, and we found out that our cash is napakalaki nung increase, no, in compared to the previous years. Maybe there is something wrong, or maybe that's good. So, depende sa nag-a-analyze. So, on the other analyst, pwedeng positive siya kasi nag-i-increase, ibig sabihin, okay, yung naging performance, nakapag-collect ng receivables, etc. But on the other analyst or on the other hand, pwedeng negative or hindi okay sa kanya yung ganung kataas na ratio because for a certain reason. So just like what I have said earlier, pwedeng hindi na-utilize ni business mabuti yung kanyang cash in other investments. Naging idle lang si cash. Okay? So what are the shortcomings of current ratio? So it fails to differentiate between the liquidity of the near cash assets with the other current assets. So gaya nga ng sinasabi ko kanina, ano, under current assets, meron tayong pinaka-liquid, then papunta dun sa hindi masyadong liquid. Okay, we have the cash, cash equivalents, accounts receivables, inventories, prepaid expenses, etc. So from the most liquid cash, papunta dun sa mga hindi masyadong liquid na assets. So, sa current ratio, ito yung isa-disadvantage niya kasi magkakasama lahat ng current assets. So, hindi masyadong reliable kasi andun yung inventories, which is sometimes slow-moving yung inventories natin. Andun yung prepaid expenses na sometimes hindi naman siya nagiging source ng cash, and hindi rin naman siya nagagamit agad, etc. So it assumes that even inventories and other prepaid expenses are liquid as cash, accounts receivable, or marketable securities. So ayun nga, ang assumption is that inventories and other prepaid expenses are as liquid as cash, wherein sometimes hindi naman. Then a high current ratio whose composition is more of inventories and prepaid expenses is possibly not liquid enough to meet its current obligation. So another example, ano, kung yung ating current assets, pinakamarami naman yung inventories or mas marami yung inventories, kahit na mataas yung ma-compute nating current ratio, kahit more than 1 siya, hindi pa rin ibig sabihin ay okay siya. Kaya nga sabi ko, titingnan pa rin natin yung composition ng current assets natin kasi baka merong irregularities doon sa composition ng assets. So gaya nga nito, kung mas mataas ang inventories or ang prepaid expenses under our current assets, we cannot fully say na liquid si company or yung business dahil may mataas lang tayo na compute na current ratio. Okay? Next, we have the quick ratio, another ratio under liquidity. So it is a more stringent measurement of liquidity in compare to current ratio. So if we are going to compare this to current ratio, mas stringent, mas strict yung computation natin dito. Because kung papansin nyo, sa ating formula, wala na dito si inventories. So we only have here the cash, then the receivables, and the marketable securities. Then, divided by pa din sa current liabilities. So it reflects the firm's ability to pay its short-term obligations. So ganun pa rin ang ibig sabihin, the higher the quick ratio, the more liquid the firm is. So let's compute. For 2012, so meron tayong cash, receivables, and marketable securities. Ito yung nasa taas. So just simply add those three and then divided by the current liabilities na 104,000, we have 1.01 is to 1. Okay? Then for 2013, we have 70,000, 35,000, and 35,000 no, na pinagsama-sama. And then, current liabilities naman ay 105,000. So, our quick ratio is 1.33. Then, for 2014, we have 65, 40, and 40,000. Then, 110,800 yung ating current liabilities. We yield 1.31. So, as you can notice here, from 2012, mababa. 2013, nag-increase, and then for 2014 ay bumaba siya ulit ng 0.2 or ng 2. Okay? So, what will be the possible implication? So, still, maganda pa rin yung 1.31. That means nag-improve siya in compare pa rin dito sa 1.01. Okay? So, improving naman siya from 2012 to 2014. So, nagkaroon lang tayo ng pagbaba in terms of cash, in terms of receivables, nadagdagan tayo. In terms of marketable securities, nadagdagan din tayo. Okay? Then, ang assumptions naman for quick ratio is that it assumes that the firm's accounts receivable are properly managed and collected in a short period of time. So, andun pa rin yung receivables, pero ang assumption is that maayos na nakokolekta, tsaka mabilis na nakokolekta yung receivables. Kasi if you're going to think about receivables, hindi naman lahat ng oras or lahat ng panahon ay mabilis makakakolekta ng receivables ang business. So, there are times na mahihirapan sila nakakolekta ng receivables. So, kung baga, hindi rin siya maituturing na liquid na the most liquid, hindi gaya ng cash. Okay? But here, in quick ratio, ang assumption natin, kaya kasama pa rin siya sa ating formula, is that, ang assumption is that receivables are properly managed and collected in a short period of time. Then, inventory is not included. So, hindi na natin yung sinama sa inventory because of the length of time needed to convert inventory into cash. So, hindi siya ganun ka-liquid. And then, prepaid expenses are excluded because they are not convertible into cash and so are not capable of covering current liabilities. So, tinatanggalan natin dyan yung prepaid expenses kasi hindi naman nga convertible into cash ang prepaid expenses. Hinihintay lang yan na magastos. No? And also, hindi naman natin siya maipangbabayad ng ating current liabilities. Next, we have the cash position ratio. So, from current ratio to quick ratio na mas stringent or mas mahigpit, then ito naman yung pinakamahigpit, which is the cash position ratio. Because this ratio, no, ito na yung pinaka-close to pure liquidity. Okay? So, there's a possibility of encountering problems with accounts receivables. So, kaya yung accounts receivables, tinanggal na natin siya dito sa ating formula. No? So, may assumption na baka hindi makolekta agad yung receivables. So, kaya hindi siya ganun ka-liquid. So, the cash position ratio is a step closer to pure liquidity by removing the accounts receivable from the quick ratio. So, gaya naman ang nakikita nyo dito, ano? Ang meron na lang dyan ay yung mga liquid or pinakamalapit sa liquidity or the most liquid types of current assets. So, we have here the cash, we have here the cash equivalents, and we have the short-term investments na right away ay pwede mo namang ibenta. Okay? Another type of financial ratio is we have the activity ratios. So here naman, ang minameasure natin dito generally ay yung activity or yung operation ng business, yung efficiency in terms of its operations. So you have here the accounts receivable turnover, average collection period, inventory turnover, average age of inventory, operating cycle, fixed asset turnover, and total asset turnover. So para saan ang activity ratios again? So these are asset management ratios which measure the firm's efficiency in managing its assets. So how efficient the company is or the business is in managing its assets. Okay? So these activity ratios are used to determine how rapid various accounts are converted into cash. So aside from it measures the usefulness or utilization of its assets, minemeasure din niya yung bilis, no, ng pag-convert, no, ni business from inventory or from accounts receivable into cash. So the more kasi na mas mabilis ang conversion, no, ng business, ibig sabihin mas nagiging efficient siya in asset management. So generally, a high turnover ratio is associated with good asset management and a low turnover ratio with bad asset management. So first we have the accounts receivable turnover. So it estimates how fast the accounts receivable is converted into cash during the year. So in general, the higher the accounts receivable turnover, the better. It means that the firm's customers are prompt payers. So accounts receivable turnover, yung bilis ng pagkokolekta ng receivables into cash sa loob ng isang taon. So mas maganda, mas mataas yung receivable turnover because that means mas mabilis yung pagbabayad or mabilis yung pagkolekta natin ng ating receivables. An excessively high ratio may indicate that the company's credit policy is too stringent, not tapping the potential for profit through sales to customers in higher risk classes. So kapag ka naman masyadong mataas daw yung ratio or yung accounts receivable ratio natin, merong implications. Pwede ngang ibig sabihin, masyadong mahigpit naman si business or si company sa pagkolekta or sa kanilang credit policy. Okay? Kapag ka naman masyadong mababa, that means naman na masyado namang too lax or masyadong maluwag naman si business on its credit policy. So here is the formula for our accounts receivable turnover. Net credit sales or net sales over the average accounts receivables. So net credit sales, okay, because we are offering credit. So saan ba nag-a-arise ang accounts receivables? Out of credit. So kailangan, nakikita nyo sa inyong financial statements, merong nakalagay na net credit sales. Okay? Because dun mag-a-arise yung ating computation. Yun yung gagamitin natin. Then, for the average accounts receivable, paano ba kinocompute yung average accounts receivable? So, we just need to add yung previous tsaka yung current na accounts receivable divided by 2. So, gaya na nakikita nyo dito. Ayan. So, for 2013, no? So, halimbawa, ang kanyang receivables previously ay 35,000 and then ang current ay 20,000. Then divide mo lang siya by 2, which is constant, to get the average. So meron tayong 27,500. So same here with 2014. Okay? So ito yung, baligtad pala tayo dito. Ito yung ating luma, ito yung ating bago. Okay? So dito, pagdating sa 2014, ang luma natin is 35,000. Ito yung galing sa 2013. And then, 40,000 naman yung pinaka-ending or pinaka-updated for 2014. So, meron tayong average accounts receivable na 37,500. Okay, so nakuha na natin yung average accounts receivable. So, pwede na natin makompute yung ART or accounts receivable turnover natin. So, we have here given, no? So, assumption, given yung ating net credit sales for 2013, 185,000. Then, yung nakuha natin kaninang average accounts receivable, we have 27,500. So, may yield natin is 6.73. So, binagtungan natin ng times because yung makukuha nating sagot sa accounts receivable turnover, ang ibig sabihin, yung how fast the accounts receivable is converted into cash. Ibig sabihin, 6.73 times na mabilis yung pagkakolekta or yung pagbabayad ng customers, no, sa ating receivables. Or 6.73 times na nako-convert yung ating receivables into cash. Okay? So, ito ay nakadepende ulit, again, sa type ng business and depende rin siya sa nag-a-analyze. So, it can be okay or it can be not good enough or ito ay kulang pa. Next, for 2014 naman, so we have the given 160,000 na net credit sales divided by the average accounts receivable kanina, which is 37,500. So, we have here 4.27 times. So, 4.27 times na nako-convert siya into cash. So, if you're going to compare 2013 and 2014, so bumaba yung ating 2014. So, ibig sabihin, bumagal yung ating collection or baka may mga customers tayo na hindi pa nakakabayad or mabagal magbayad ng kanilang receivables. So, in this case, pagka ganitong bumaba, pwedeng may problem or ano bang dapat natin gawin dito? Kailangan na ba natin itong pagtuunan ng pansin or ano ang kailangan natin gawin kung kailangan natin pataasin ito? Then, for the average collection period, so it measures the efficiency of the firm's collection policy by computing the number of days to collect the receivables. So, kung kanina, number of times, dito naman, number of days it will take to collect the receivables. No? Ito yung gap or ito yung time. No? Time it will take for the receivables to be collected. So, the formula is 365 days divided by the accounts receivable turnover ratio. Yung nakuha natin kanina, ano, na 4.27 at saka 6.73. So, 365 days is fixed. So, for 2014, 365 over 6.73, we have 54.23 days. So, ibig sabihin, it took 54.23 days para ma-convert yung receivables into cash. Next, for 2014, 365 over 4.27, 85.48 days. So, it took 85.48 days to convert the receivables into cash. So, if you're going to compare this to, again, gaya kanina, bumaba yung ating times. So, ibig sabihin, medyo nahirapang mag-collecta ng receivables. Dito naman, medyo humaba yung collection period. No? So, ibig sabihin, baka may na-late ng payment or medyo may nahirapan magbayad yung ating customers or baka hindi tayo nag-follow up sa kanila ng collection or magbabayad na sila. No? So, here, we can analyze na pwede natin tong increase. No? So, from here, the management or the financial analyst will need to create strategies or to formulate strategies in order to make solutions for these kinds of concerns. So another activity ratio is the inventory turnover ratio. So it shows the efficiency of the firm in handling its inventory. Also, it measures how fast the inventory is turned into sales. So gaano ba kabilis nakakapag-convert si business ng inventory into sales or into cash? Or gaano kabilis siya nakakabenta? So, kapag ang na-yield nating ratio is low inventory turnover rate, so later makikita natin, it may mean may overstocks tayo, meron tayong mga stocks na nagiging obsolete na, or meron tayong mga deficiencies in the product line. So, as a result, kapag marami tayong stocks na nagiging obsolete, we tend to carry a high carrying cost. So, mas nakakapag-incur tayo ng high carrying cost kapag meron tayong mga overstocks, meron tayong mga slow-moving items. As well, nagiging risk to obsolescence din, ano? Lalo na kung yung mga ini-store nating products or goods ay madaling masira, pasira na, or inaanay na, or nabubulok, or napapanis na. Then, a high turnover rate may indicate inadequate inventory levels. Yung sa sobrang bilis ng conversion, baka may point na wala ka ng stock na pangbenta, na kapag ka merong gustong bumili, wala kang maibenta kasi masyadong mabilis yung turnover. Okay? So, the formula is cost of goods sold. Cost of goods sold, ito yung makikita natin sa ating income statement, yung ginastos natin to produce yung ating ibinebenta, and then average inventories. So, same way kung paano natin kinuha yung average accounts receivable, yung previous versus plus the current divided by 2. So, just like this. So, for 2013, we have the average inventories na 90,000. So, 80,000, ito yung inventories ng 2013. Yung 100,000, ito yung inventories ng 2012. Then, for 2014, ito yung inventories natin for 2013. And then, for 2014, ito naman yung inventories natin. Then, just divide 2 to get the average. And then, we have the same. No? So, we have the same. 2013 and 2014, 90,000 yung ating average inventories. So, let's try to compute for the inventory turnover. So, we have for 2013, given, ang assumption natin is given itong ating cost of goods sold, 115,625, divided by yung ating nakuha kanina na average inventory, 90,000. So, ang lalabas ay 1.28 times. So, again, number of times. So, 1.28 times na nakakapag-convert si business ng kanyang inventory into sales. Then, for 2014 naman, 100,000 yung ating cost of goods sold, and then 90,000 again yung ating average inventory. So, we have 1.11 times. So, again, if we are going to compare this to 1.28 to 1.11, so medyo bumagal yung conversion natin ng 2014. Bumagal yung conversion ng inventory into sales. So, again, it depends upon the assessment or analyzation of our analyst. Then the average age of inventory, it refers to the length of the holding period, which shows a potentially greater risk of obsolescence. So how long the firm holds their inventory. So the average age of inventory. So the formula here is 365. So again, fixed. Yun yung ating calendar days. And then yung ating inventory turnover na na-compute kanina. Okay? So for 2014, 365 over 1.28 times. So we have yield here 285.16 days. So it took 285.16 days bago na-dispose or bago na-ibenta yung kanilang stocks or yung kanilang inventory. Then for 2014, we have 365 over 1.11, 328.83 days naman. So, since medyo tumagal, no? Medyo tumagal yung ating conversion into sales. So, we can assume that there is a problem, or if there is a problem, we need to identify anong possible problem, bakit bumagal yung conversion ng inventory into sales. Okay, and also we need to consider and we need to pay attention to this because there is a greater risk of obsolescence for our inventories. Then we have the operating cycle. It measures the time it takes to convert the inventories and receivables into cash. So, kumbaga parang pinagsama na conversion ng ating average collection period tsaka average age of inventory. So, it just simply measures yung haba ng panahon na na-convert yung inventories into receivables and then yung receivables until sa na-collect na siya. So, our operating cycle, the formula is average collection period plus average age of inventory. So, yung na-compute natin earlier na average collection period and average age of inventory, we just simply add those days para malaman natin if how long yung naging conversion or yung naging operating cycle natin. So for 2013, 339.39 days, and for 2014, 414.31 days. So again, if you are going to compare this two, mas maikli yung period of time ng conversion doon kay 2013 kesa kay 2014. Okay? So medyo malaki yung gaps doon sa base. So maybe we need to pay attention to this gap. What is the problem, or what are the reasons for the problems identified? Okay? Another ratio is the fixed asset turnover. So fixed assets, typically it comprises property, plant and equipment, or yung ating PPE. So it is considered as the most important long-term asset of the firm in our statement of financial position or balance sheet. So fixed asset turnover ratio measures how much well the firm uses every peso of fixed asset invested to generate sales. So how effective and how efficient the firm is in using its fixed assets to generate sale. Okay? In every peso of fixed asset, how much yung nag-generate nating sales. So it becomes a good indicator of efficiency in the use of a fixed asset. So our formula is net sales over the average net fixed assets. So paano makuha yung average net fixed assets? So same way kung paano natin nakuha yung average accounts receivable and inventories natin. So we just simply add the previous plus the current divided by the 2. So here, for 2013, we have the net sales, yung given. Sabihin natin given natin yung net sales natin na 185,000. Then divide natin siya dun sa ating may yield na average net fixed assets. So we have 112.12%. Then for 2014, we have the sales na 160,000, and then the average, no, yung mako-compute natin from there, and then we yield 88.89%. So what does 88.89% and 112.12%? So again, it refers to the efficiency of the business or of the firm in the use of their fixed asset to generate sales. So that means for 2013, the firm was able to generate sales 112.12% of sales for every every peso of fixed asset, no, na kanilang ginagamit or ininvest. Okay? So dito, the more na mas mataas, ibig sabihin, the more na mas naging efficient si firm sa paggamit ng kanyang fixed asset. Unlike the 2014 na medyo mababa, 88.89%. No, medyo mababa, pero yung 88.89% is actually good. But if you're going to consider it to the previous year, which is 112.12%, so makikita talaga natin na medyo bumaba siya. So ibig sabihin, medyo naging inefficient si business noong panahon ng 2014. The last activity ratio is the total asset turnover. So it measures the firm's ability to generate sales successfully. A low turnover ratio may be due to many factors, and it is important to identify the underlying reasons. So basically, again, it refers to the efficiency, the effectiveness of the firm or the management to use their total assets in order to yield or to generate sales. So in principle, a high total asset turnover indicates an efficient asset management. However, since total asset turnover is composed of current and fixed assets, all other ratios like inventory turnover, receivables turnover, and fixed asset turnover are part of the analysis in the total assets turnover. No? So kumbaga, suma total itong total assets. But since ang composition ng ating assets, andyan ang current at fixed assets. So, in computing total asset turnover, kailangan pa rin natin ng computation or to assess also the individual ratios for inventory, for accounts receivable, for the fixed asset. So, for the asset turnover formula, we have the net sales over the average total assets. assets. So again, same way kung paano natin kukuhanin yung average, previous plus current divided by 2, no? Or current plus previous divided by 2. So net sales is given. So here is the example of getting the average total assets for 2013 and 2014. And then let's proceed kung paano natin kukunin yung asset turnover natin. So we have net sales na 160,000, then 185,000, then 412,000, ito yung nakuha nating average from 2014, and then 377,500 for 2013. So for 2013, ang nakuha nating asset turnover ratio is 49.01. And then for 2014, we have 38.79%. So as you can see, again, bumaba yung ating percentage from 2013 to 2014. So maybe meron konting inefficiency on the part of the firm, or there is a problem to any of its assets such as inventories, receivables, fixed assets, etc. Okay? So dito, the more na mas mataas, in principle, mas maganda daw. Okay? But since, sabi natin kanina, composed ito ng current and fixed assets, so we need to compute further individually yung turnover ratio for inventories, for receivables, and for fixed asset natin. So both liquidity and activity ratios measure the efficiency, measure the liquidity, measure the quality of asset management of a business. Also, itong dalawa na to is magandang indication, no? Magandang indication ng health or stability ng isang business. But there are times na hindi siya parehas nami-meet ng isang business. They are liquid as well as they are able to manage their assets efficiently. So there are times na hindi ganon. Okay? So there are risk and return trade-offs between liquidity and activity ratios. So sometimes there are things that you need to sacrifice in order to achieve liquidity or either activity. Okay? So holding a high amount of current assets means less liquidity risk and less returns to the firm. Maintaining a high level of current assets than productive fixed assets is a sign of risk aversion of the firm. The firm would rather have a small return on short-term investments on current assets rather than generate more income in fixed assets. So there are times that businesses maybe sometimes confused, or they just want to have short-term return rather than long-term. So, kung minsan, they want to hold a high amount of current assets, okay? So, that means they are carrying less liquidity risk. So, that means mas liquid sila kasi they have a high amount of current assets. So, on the other side, on one side, that's a good thing. Okay? But on the other side, hindi maganda yung ibig sabihin nun. Because holding a high amount of current assets means hindi masyadong nag-i-invest si business. Okay? Idle yung kanyang funds. Idle yung kanyang current assets or yung kanyang cash. So, maintaining a high level of current assets than productive fixed assets is a sign of risk aversion. So, if they want to carry or to hold as much as current assets, that means they are risk averse. They don't want to take risks. They don't want to invest into productive fixed assets. Okay? So, mas pinipili nila na mag-yield ng kahit na small return on short-term investments rather than to invest in fixed assets wherein potentially they can have or they can generate more income. No? So, they need to sacrifice one thing to get the other. On the other hand, firms which invest more on fixed assets are more exposed to liquidity risk due to funds tied. Firms which succeed with fixed asset investments enjoy more economic returns to the firm. So ito naman yung kabilang side wherein si firm naman mas gugustuhin nila or mas gusto nila na mas mag-invest on fixed assets other than to hold as much cash or high amounts of cash or current assets. Pero they are exposed to liquidity risk. So that means since nag-invest sila na nag-invest into fixed assets or other investments, they are holding less cash. In case of settling their obligations, naka-tie up yung pera nila dun sa investments. So, yung kanilang liquidity is lesser. Okay? So, but then again, ang advantage naman ng pag-i-invest is that they can sacrifice short-term returns and they are expecting future possible na mas malaking kita out of their investments naman in fixed assets. So it's just a matter of a proper balancing and trading the risks and returns attached to the specific investments or decisions. No? Are they going to hold more cash but they can generate only small return, or are they going to invest but they are carrying lesser liquidity? No? So it's just a matter of balancing this two. So maintaining a proper balance between liquidity and return is important to the overall financial health of a business. So high profitability will not always result in a strong cash flow position. The net income may be high, but financial difficulty may still exist because of the maturing debts and assets that need replacement. So being or having high profits doesn't mean na malakas ang ating cash flow or ang cash position natin ay okay na. No? So sometimes, kasabay nung maganda ang profit natin, maganda ang kita natin, pwedeng may mga utang tayo na kailangan nating bayaran or meron tayong mga assets na dahil gamit na natin, kailangan na nating palitan. So it is possible that growing firms may experience a decline in liquidity since the working capital needed to support the increasing sales is invested in assets that could not be realized in due time to pay its current obligations. Thus, the effect of earning activities on liquidity is clearly recognized by comparing cash flow from operations to net income. So thank you. So those are the financial ratios, liquidity, and activity ratios. So there are also other ratios that I'm going to discuss for the part 2 of this topic. So again, thank you. And for any questions, just comment on the comment section down below.